Hello, my name is Fred Shell, and that's one of my boats there. Actually, this is the first serious test sail of this boat, done a couple of years ago. This is the Swifty 11. In this video, I'm going to try to show you what the Shell boats look like and what it's like for you to build one. We have kits available for all of them, and for a few of them we have plans that you can build from scratch. So we'll just go right through, sailing on some of them and building on some of them, and hopefully this will give you a clear notion of what we're all about here. It's very similar to a lot of the other boats. Its rig and construction and everything else is pretty typical. So we'll get into the construction on one of these, show you what that's like. Here's the typical crate that the boat would arrive in. So we have to crate it up pretty snugly to make it through standard truck shipping, over-the-road trucks. But you might find this, actually might find the box useful for make a workbench out of it or whatever. Anyhow, all the pieces come in this. It would be, it's all put together with screws, so you can take it apart without, tearing things up. And then you'll be all set to start. When we prepare the kit here, we cut out all the pieces from patterns and test fit them all here. And we'll show you some test fitting in farther on in this video. But, right now I'm just taking the lid off here. And you can see the pieces. There's right on top there are the deck pieces. We have an epoxy kit available also, and that isn't in this crate. That would be sent to you separately by UPS if you order that. The hardware, sail, and everything else is right in here, though. Okay, I've taken that out of the box. Now, in the case of the Swifty 11, which this is, it comes with its own building jig pieces in the box. The 12 and the 14, you have to put together a simple building jig from your own materials. The first step is to take the bottom out. Well, you have to take the building jig pieces out and put those together and true them up on a pair of sawhorses or something else to support them, and then you attach the bottom down to that building jig. What the building jig does is that it gives you a solid place to hold the pieces, to hold the boat while you're putting it together, and it also gives a curvature to the bottom. After you've got this, you'll want to be, well, what I'm doing here now is there are a couple of things that are pre-assembled in the kit that you have to take apart, like the dagger board trunk there I'm working on, and the transom, which is next to it there. You'll take those apart and put them back together again with glue. Now I've put that dagger board trunk all together with glue, and here I am getting ready to attach some of the, this is a seat support. This goes across the boat. It's basically what you do. You butter up the joint really well. You want to have enough glue on there so that when you put pieces together, it squeezes out just a little bit on the sides. Whatever's squeezed out is basically wasted, so you don't need more than just a little bit, but you'd like to see it make full contact everywhere. If you use a kind of a wet mix of glue, wet enough that it'll soak into both pieces really well. If it's too wet, it'll drip off before you can get it in place. But so you have to compromise there. But get it nice and juicy, and just put it all together and use the screws provided. Well, all this is detailed in the kit instructions, of course. What size screws to use, and the order of putting all these pieces in place. The cordless rechargeable screwdriver that I've got there is just as an essential part of this operation. You don't need an expensive one or heavy duty. In fact, a lightweight one I think is probably better. It's a little less tiring to use. That's the idea. There, now I've got all this interior support system in. The rear seat supports. These are attached to the transom. So now this is nice and solid. The middle seat support, front seat support, and the daggerboard trunk. Now these are set well into glue. And when I got them, when glue squished out here, I took my finger and ran it down through the corner there to make just a little bit of a curved fillet joint. You can use a fillet stick and put a lot of glue in there and really fill it, but it's not necessary when you have the 3/4 pine. That's enough. If you've got glue squeezing out on both sides, you've got a good bond and a good seal. You don't have to worry about that. The thing you do want to do is to go back then and scrape with the chisel end of the fillet stick, or you can use a putty knife, but go back and scrape the glue off that is squeezed off to the side when you run your finger down. You'll have gobs of glue up on, especially if you're going to varnish, because you'll have to sand that all off later. It'll be really a big chore to sand it. Any place where you can scrape the glue off while it's wet, rather than letting it harden and counting on sanding it later, you'll be way ahead in terms of total time spent. It's sometimes easy to put it off. You think, well, it'll be easy enough to sand it later. Well, it won't be. The epoxy is very hard, very soon, and it's not something you want to do extra sanding on if you're going to avoid it. And you can avoid it by just using the fillet stick. Like I've got a place right here, and I can see where there's extra epoxy up onto the light wood, where if I varnish the inside of this boat, it'll show. So I just scrape it off with the putty knife, and then I won't have to sand it off. Especially true up into corners, where it's even harder to sand. There, I've got a pretty clean job of that now. I don't mess with down in here. This is going to be inside the seat, so you can leave it sloppy as you want to. That's going to be, once you put that seat on there, that is sealed for eternity. You know, I prepared the boat for planking, for putting the first pair of planks on. Basically what I've done is I put a screw in each of the screw holes along the edge of the bottom. I think we can see those here. There's one about every 6 inches. There's a hole made for each one. So we just get those started enough so they won't tip when you try to drive them in with the screwdriver. Now over here, we have one of the planks laid down here, ready to be glued. You can see that there's a pencil mark. It's in about 3/4 of an inch, about an inch on this bottom plank from the edge. Now what you're going to do is apply glue to that plank in that strip from the pencil line to the edge. I mixed up a cup here, and Again, you want to get it out of the cup reasonably fast. You don't want to fiddle around getting it perfect while it's still in the cup. And I always think the ideal consistency for the glue is one where if you tip the cup up, it'll run out, but not too fast. And you see that bead that I'm putting down. And I'm going to go right down. I'll get out of the picture here, but I'm going to get right down to the end of the plank, just pouring out that much. Right about in the middle of the space where I want it. Now I've got hardly any left in the cup here, not enough to make heat to cause it to set up. So that's good, I can let my cup just sit. Now I'll go back here and spread this out and spread it just up to the pencil line. Now you get quite a bit of time to work on this, so you can be careful. Even in warm weather, you probably have at least a half hour. I mean, you don't need that, but 15 minutes. Now I'm going to go ahead, I'm getting out of the picture again here, but I'm going to go right down to the end. I can do this pretty fast because I've done it many times. I've put glue on the other plank, which is, the first one I did there was the left bottom plank. This is the right bottom plank. And I'm going to put that one on first just because I think it'll be easier to see it with the camera. So I prepared it exactly the same way, and I've got it sitting there where it's going to go roughly. The back end of it, back there, is sitting on a chair just to keep it up roughly at the right position. There's a lot of flexibility in that plank. The bottom doesn't have to be in an exact place. If it was hanging all the way down the floor, it'd be hard to get the front into position. But with it up at chair height, it's good. And now we'll look in here a little closer at the. See if I can come in closer here. Yeah. You can still see the screw holes in this plank where these screws have been in. You can see these holes. Once the glue sets into it a little bit, and you can see through the glue to that hole. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to place the plank so that the edge of the plank comes right to that pencil line. You'll still see the pencil line, but it'll be right to it. Now, as an extra guide for positioning, I've drawn 3 little hatch marks across each joint when it was pre-assembled. So I don't think you can see these, but there's 3 pencil lines here that start on this, and they go off onto this, and they were continuous lines when it was pre-assembled. So we're going to put them in position so that they're continuous lines again. And we'll start at the bow, and the thing we do is get this first screw down through as far as it'll go, and then try and find the hole with it. And I've got the tip in the hole, and to check, I can see that the pencil lines, I was talking about the 3 hatch lines, are all lined up. The pencil line that's the edge thing is in the right place. So I'm going to draw that one out. Now I'm going to go on down the plank. At the back here, it's hung up a little bit. There we go. A little bit. Now, if you have a helper can hold the back end. But if they do, don't let them push the plank right into place yet. It should stay away from the boat until you're actually putting the screws in. Because otherwise it'll be sliding up and down along the joint and scraping the glue off. So what I'm doing now is I'm not drawing these screws down real tight. I'm trying to stop just before they get snug. But the glue might start to come out a little bit. And what we accomplish by that is we're wetting the glue on the plank is wetting the underside of this. But we're not putting enough pressure on it to squeeze it all out of the joint. And let it soak just for the amount of time it takes to run from one end of the boat to the other. To give the glue a chance to soak into the grain of the wood a little bit. All right, I've gone all the way down. And now now I'm going to just go back, start at this end again, and bring it down. And now the glue will really squeeze out. And get these kind of gently. If you run too long like this, it's stripping. It isn't grabbing onto this plank as well anymore. If you do that in a couple places, it's not going to hurt anything. But you don't want to run them all down and keep it grinding, because you're just drilling a hole in the wood. And you're losing the strength of the screw. We're using these screws just to clamp the plank. We want them held together while the glue dries. We'll be taking these out tomorrow. Now I'm going to put the plank on the other side before I put these in. Before I pull these up into place. The other one's in place. I did that just exactly the same way. And I'll take some screws and draw these things up. The seat supports. And the transom. Now at the bow, we do a little bit of stitching glue. Put a wire tie. So with each pair of planks we use 2 wire ties to draw the edges of the bow together. Starting by hand. And then take some pliers, push them together pretty tight, where the wood touches right at the tie. Now quite often, this bottom one, you do the same thing, but sometimes when you pull this one together, the wood, because of the position of the planks, there may be a gap down here. Just pull it together reasonably tight. The gap doesn't hurt anything, because we're going to build up an epoxy putty stem in here. You'd like this to be on the bottom, you'd like it to be flat across, so the planks are not skewed one on top of the other, higher than the other, but at the same level in here. So that's the first pair of planks put down, and that's the same way, exactly the same way with the others. There, we got all the planks on now. They were all done the same way, using that same sequence, and you tie all the stems together at the front just like that. Once you got that first pair, you won't have any trouble doing the others. So this is what that fillet looks like from the inside, the stem fillet. We've got a total width here of a little over 1 inch. So it's really a triangular shape piece I mean, it ends up being a triangular section through there. Makes a very strong stem. I thicken it up a little more right at the knuckle, where the one plank joins the other, because it isn't a smooth curve here. Thicken it up a little more there, because on the outside, when you're finishing it, you can grind it rounded. Now this I haven't done real smooth, because this is going to be forward of the bulkhead. Bulkhead in next. Now it comes to you in a kit like this, with the strip attached to the bulkhead that hasn't been glued. So you want to take the screws out and put glue in the joint and put the screws back in. Before you do that, just the bulkhead is attached with 4 screws. There's one right near the top at each end, and then one down there through the second plank, the middle planks. You take this, if you tilt it backwards a little bit, and get the top 2 screws in, one on each side, and then push it forward and see if it'll go far enough forward to line up, to set in the place that's marked for the bulkhead there, the 2 pencil lines. Possibly you'll find it'll hang up on the bottom if you used a lot of epoxy down there, or in one of the corners. If it needs to be freed up a little bit in order to get into that position, you want to do that before you glue things up. So just make a mark on it where it's binding. If you can't, you can push fairly hard near the bottom of this to get it into place. But if it won't go into place, then mark where you need to trim it a little bit, and swing it back, pull the screws out, shave that off with coarse sandpaper or a grinder, sander, rasp, whatever you got, and then put it back in and make sure it's going to fit. And then take it apart, like I said before, and glue the piece on, and then we'll be putting it in place. And I'll show you how I put it in place.
There we are. I've actually just put that bulkhead right in place and filleted the edges there. And some of the bulkheads will be a little different from this. You got to notice that some of the things there'll be some changes. Like the bulkhead often has 2 pieces of plywood and a strip on top. Whatever is together that isn't glued together, you need to take it apart and glue it together before you finish up and install it. And I've coated all these areas that I wanted to coat now on the boat itself. Let's see. And put the deck strip on and the combings, and we'll put the rubber rails on. I didn't mention it, but before I coated the inside of the boat on the bottom, I took out the screws that were holding it to the building jig. So it's just setting on the building jig now, but it's still stable enough to work on. But you have to take those screws out and fill those holes with epoxy putty before you coat the bottom. For this deck strip in the center, I've coated the deck where it's going to lie with epoxy, and I've coated the underside of this strip with epoxy glue, thickened epoxy. This is not for structural, you don't really need both surfaces coated for structural reasons here. My concern is that if this isn't making total contact everywhere, we don't want water to run under and touch raw wood. So if we just coated this, there would probably be spaces under there that wouldn't be bonded, and with the potential for water to run under and get into the raw wood and soak in. So this is one of those places where we do coat both surfaces before putting the pieces together. On the rub rails, likewise, but for slightly different reasons, but I butter up this edge to the depth of where the rub rail is going to go, and also coat the rub rail, because when you butter up this, you're forcing glue into any gaps here, which is really good to make this a good structural bond. Because on the front part of this deck, we have 1/4 inch ply resting on the edge of 1/4 inch planking ply. And we're counting on the bond that comes in when the being really good there, and then also the rub rail bridging this gap. So we want a really good bond there. So it's worthwhile to take the time to do that, double that up. So now the rubber rails, it's basically everything is done in terms of being put together. I've gone around and puttied all the screw heads where the screws are sunk in. Put a little glue in any gaps. There'll always be some gaps, like where the combing meets the deck. Work a little glue into any gaps in there and try and make it neat. I'm going to have to sand that. So tomorrow is another day. Tomorrow I'll be able to sand this decks clean and either coat the deck or flip it over and epoxy fillet the bottom seams. Whichever comes first, we'll see. All right, I've turned the boat over. You might need some help for that. If you're careful, you can do it by yourself. I always do. I prepared the bottom lap seams here for filleting. Well, what you do is take like a coarse piece of sandpaper and fold it into a square corner kind of, and clean out those lap joints. So there's no drips that are sticking way down that are going to get in the way of this operation, which is the filleting. Now for filleting, you mix up the epoxy and the sawdust or wood flour that you're using as a filler in the epoxy. Mix it up almost like a peanut butter consistency, something that won't sag when you put it in place. I like to work off a pallet like that. I have a scrap of plywood, and I pour the epoxy out onto that. If you do that, it won't set up by generating heat in its cup, and it'll take a good long time to set up. And then applying it with a wide putty knife like that is pretty fast too. You can scrape it off the piece and just put it into place roughly. And here we go. We take the 1-inch fillet stick and just drag it along that seam like that, and it makes a curved fillet joint. And this fills in the gaps where the planks overlap each other, and there's always some gaps in there and voids. And do this, and it'll push the glue right down into or the putty, I should say, because it's too thick. It's thickened up enough, we call it putty. Push it right down into the gap, and it'll also form this nice curve. And then we go back and we scrape off the excess glue, putty, whatever, with the fillet stick, the other end of the fillet stick, or you can use a wood chisel or a putty knife. This will leave you with a nice, pretty smooth curve. Now I've filleted all those lap seams like that. In addition, I put a strip of fiberglass tape down the stem at the front, and on where the bottom planks overlap the bottom, you round those off a bit and put a strip of fiberglass tape on that to reinforce it. Now here we go. We got it all coated with epoxy. It starts to look pretty nice now. I think we've got 2 coats on there, which gives it a real hard shine. Makes a super finish on the bottom. I don't know if we mentioned the skeg before. The skeg has been put on too after turning the boat over. I've got the coat that's white primer on the outside. I'm going to put a top coat on that yet. And we'll need varnish yet on the top decks. It's epoxy coated. I decided to finish the inside like this. We're going to varnish the seats. And the gray is all finished here. we're just about done.
Here's this Swifty 11 launched. Just in our test pond here, but at least it got in the water. And there goes the captain ready to take it out for a spin. It is sort of a catboat, basically. Single sail and the mast pretty far forward. Well, we don't have any wind to speak of there, but there's enough to give it a little bit of a push. It's always fun taking this first sail. Now you notice I've left the timer on this tape, and I totaled it up, and it took me about 20 hours to run through the construction after, opening the crate basically. Which of course I don't usually start out with a crate like that, but I wanted to do this as a demonstration. You can probably figure about twice that much time. I've done quite a few of these, so there's a learning curve, all right. And on that's like even 11 or 12 is about 40 hours. Now there goes the cat. Now he's taking